It's July 25, 1799. On the Abukir Peninsula, the suffocating desert heat mixes with the smell of gunpowder. Ahead, Napoleon Bonaparte watches as the Ottoman forces approach en masse, with the sea in the background and battle smoke rising into the sky. The French lines are in formation, ready to withstand the impact of thousands of enemy soldiers. Drums roll, bayonets gleam under the sun, and the sound of Napoleon's orders fills the air. Advance, do not retreat. It's a clash where victory could solidify his control in the east, while defeat threatens his ambitions and his very survival. This is the Battle of Aboukir, a fierce struggle that will determine Napoleon's fate in Egypt and the future of his emerging empire. Iron Legacy, where history lives. In late July 1798, a young French general with grand ambitions set foot on the hot sands of Egypt. Napoleon Bonaparte, then only 29 years old, had led a bold expedition to the Middle East, accompanied by an army of 35,000 men. His goal? To establish a new empire and shake the foundations of British dominance in the region. The scene was one of scorching heat, with sand swirling into clouds of dust around the weary soldiers. French vessels, worn down by a long voyage across the Mediterranean, unloaded their troops onto the beaches of Alexandria. Napoleon, always leading from the front, stepped off the ship with a determined gaze and a clear purpose. Dust and the deafening sound of orders echoed along the coast as the troops marched, reorganizing themselves to advance inland. For the French soldiers, Egypt was a mysterious and hostile land, filled with unknown challenges. But for Napoleon, it was a unique opportunity to prove himself and achieve glory. He firmly believed in the power of his leadership and was prepared to conquer the impossible. With the landing complete, Napoleon wasted no time. He quickly began preparations to march toward the heart of Egypt, ready to face not only the blistering heat and a lack of supplies, but also the Ottoman armies that were already mobilizing to expel the French invaders. This would be a campaign marked by fierce battles and bold strategic decisions. Among all these battles, the most crucial one was about to unfold: the Battle of Aboukir. Napoleon's decision to invade Egypt was not merely a matter of personal ambition. It had a clear strategic goal. Since the French Revolution, France had been in constant conflict with the major European powers, especially the United Kingdom. Unable to confront the Royal Navy directly, Napoleon devised a bold plan: seize Egypt to cut off Britain's trade route to India, which was crucial to the British Empire. Beyond its military value, Egypt also held symbolic importance. To Napoleon, it was a land rich in historical and cultural treasures, offering not only a strategic base, but also an opportunity to elevate his prestige in Europe. Controlling Egypt could pave the way for further expansion in the Middle East and, possibly, a challenge to British power in India. However, the invasion was a significant gamble. Napoleon was aware that Egypt was a hostile territory, marked by a harsh climate and a populace ready to resist the invaders. He also faced the looming threat of a powerful Ottoman force determined to drive the French out of Egyptian soil. Nevertheless, Napoleon was confident. He believed that the discipline of his soldiers and his own leadership skills would be enough to overcome any obstacles. He carefully studied the terrain and the enemy's defenses, preparing for a series of decisive battles. The most critical of these was set to take place on the Abukir Peninsula, where Ottoman forces were already gathering for a major confrontation. With the strategic stage set, French troops advanced toward the fortress of Abukir, positioned on a narrow peninsula that would serve as the battleground for one of the most intense clashes of Napoleon's Egyptian campaign. With the French troops on the march, Napoleon focused intensely on every detail of the preparations for the decisive clash at Abukir. He knew that this battle would be a defining test of his leadership and the survival of his Egyptian campaign. The battlefield was the narrow Abukir Peninsula, flanked by the sea on one side and marshy terrain on the other, a perfect spot for ambushes but hazardous for military maneuvers. Napoleon summoned his generals for a council of war. His strategy was clear: launch a full-force assault before the Ottomans could reorganize and reinforce their defenses. He believed that speed and surprise were the keys to victory. The Ottoman troops, led by Mustafá Pasha, were well entrenched, with approximately 18,000 soldiers, including infantry, artillery, and a significant cavalry force. Napoleon was determined to leverage his advantages of discipline and superior training. He decided to divide his forces into three main columns. A central column responsible for a direct assault on the Ottoman defenses, and two flanking columns tasked with encircling the enemy and cutting off their retreat to the sea. The French artillery, renowned for its accuracy, was strategically positioned to strike at the heart of the Ottoman defenses. As the scorching sun bore down on the soldiers, Napoleon moved through the ranks, rallying his men. He knew that troop morale would be essential, especially in such challenging terrain and under harsh conditions. "Remember," he told his officers, "every battle we win here strengthens our hold and weakens the spirit of our enemies." The day of battle was rapidly approaching, and the stage was set. With his generals prepared and his troops positioned, Napoleon was ready to launch the boldest assault of his Egyptian campaign. Just as Napoleon ventured into the unknown, you too can dive deeper into history. Like the video and subscribe so you don't miss our next epic battles. At dawn on July 25, 1799, tension on the Abukir Peninsula was at its peak. Under a blazing sun, the French troops advanced in a cohesive formation as they approached the Ottoman lines. The first skirmishes broke out swiftly as French vanguard detachments encountered Ottoman scouts attempting to gauge the enemy's strength. Soon, the crackle of musket fire and the initial booms of artillery filled the air, signaling the start of the battle. Napoleon ordered the central column to launch a direct and aggressive assault, pressing the center of the Ottoman lines to destabilize their defenses. The French troops, trained in hand-to-hand combat and adept at bayonet use, advanced rapidly, forcing the Ottomans to retreat to their makeshift fortifications. Despite the initial French push, the Ottomans resisted with determination, firing musket volleys in quick succession and using their artillery to create a ring of fire around the French central column. Meanwhile, the French flanking columns began to encircle the Ottoman army, slowly advancing through the more challenging terrain. The Ottoman flanks were less protected, allowing the French to strike with greater force, exploiting their superior tactical formations. French artillery started to make a significant impact, hitting concentrated Ottoman positions and causing growing confusion in their ranks. Buoyed by the initial success, the French maintained their momentum. However, Napoleon knew that this was only the first phase of the clash. The Ottoman forces were numerous and could still regroup along a second line of defense closer to the coast. Recognizing the threat of the French encirclement, General Mustafá Pasha ordered a counterattack by his cavalry, which charged toward the French central column in an attempt to break through its lines. The Ottoman counterattack began with a massive cavalry charge, rushing at full speed toward the center of the French lines. The Ottoman horsemen, their lances and sabers glinting in the sun, aimed to break the cohesive French formation. For a brief moment, the pressure was overwhelming, and it seemed the French lines might give way under the onslaught. However, Napoleon, sensing the imminent danger, swiftly ordered the central column to form defensive squares, a hallmark of the French army's tactics. Bayonets were promptly raised into a wall of steel, while the musketeers fired at close range at the approaching cavalry. The impact was devastating. The Ottoman charge lost momentum as horsemen fell under the concentrated barrage of musket fire and the relentless bayonets. While the French center held its ground, the flanking columns intensified their advance. The disciplined and well-trained French troops continued to move methodically, forcing the Ottomans into a gradual retreat. The French artillery, taking advantage of the ground gained, began to bombard the Ottoman lines with increased precision, disrupting their formations and creating significant breaches in the enemy defenses. Observing the battle from a vantage point, Napoleon saw an opportunity for a decisive strike. He ordered his infantry reserves to advance and reinforce the central column, further increasing the pressure on the Ottoman center. French morale was high, and they surged forward with renewed fervor, shouting, "Vive la République!" as they pushed the Ottomans closer to the coast. The Ottomans, now fighting in a narrower space with no room to maneuver, struggled to hold their ground, but the French tactical superiority was clear. Mustafá Pasha, seeing his troops being overwhelmed by the French advance, tried to reorganize his forces, but the pressure was simply crushing. The battlefield was engulfed in smoke and the cries of the wounded as the French consolidated their gains. The Ottoman line began to collapse, and the troops closest to the sea showed signs of panic, attempting to retreat to avoid the imminent encirclement. With the Ottoman lines destabilized and retreating in disarray, Napoleon recognized this as the moment to deliver the final blow. He ordered a full-scale assault, concentrating all his forces in a coordinated advance. The French troops, emboldened by their previous successes, surged forward with all their might against the remaining Ottoman defenses. The flanking columns, which had advanced methodically until now, rushed to completely envelop the Ottoman army, sealing the encirclement with ruthless precision. French artillery, strategically positioned on the flanks, fired accurately, intensifying the panic in the Ottoman ranks. Seeing his forces on the brink of total encirclement, Mustafá Pasha made a last-ditch effort, rallying his remaining troops for a desperate attempt to break through the French siege. However, French discipline prevailed. The infantry formations, organized into defensive squares, easily repelled the final Ottoman assault. The French responded with a bayonet charge that cut through the center of the enemy lines, causing a general collapse among the Ottoman troops. Napoleon's decisive attack had shattered Ottoman resistance, turning the battle into a complete rout for Mustafá Pasha's forces. The tide fully turned as the Ottomans began to scatter in a chaotic retreat, with many attempting to flee to the boats docked along the shore. Soldiers abandoned their weapons and plunged into the sea in a desperate bid to escape. Chaos engulfed Abukir's beach as the French advanced relentlessly to secure their victory. Witnessing the success of his strategy, Napoleon declared triumphantly, "Victory is ours. Egypt is now France's." The French forces had won one of the most significant battles of the entire Egyptian campaign. The battlefield was strewn with debris and wounded men, with the Ottomans defeated and the French exhausted but victorious. The Battle of Aboukir had come to an end, consolidating Napoleon's control over Egypt and reaffirming his prestige as one of the greatest military commanders of his era. As the battle drew to a close, Abukir's beach became a scene of chaos and desperation. The Ottomans, now utterly defeated, attempted to reorganize, but the French advance was relentless. The Ottoman retreat became increasingly disordered, with many soldiers attempting to swim to anchored ships in a desperate bid to escape. For many, however, escape was impossible. Rough waters and French artillery continued to claim lives until the final moments of the clash. Mustafá Pasha, the leader of the Ottoman forces, was captured by the French, marking the definitive end of the battle. Even in defeat, he maintained a dignified stance, knowing he had faced one of the most skilled generals of his era. Napoleon, recognizing Mustafa's bravery, treated him with respect, but his focus soon shifted to consolidating French control over Egypt. The battlefield was a stark testament to the battle's intensity. Scattered bodies, tattered flags, abandoned weapons. For the French soldiers, victory at Abukir was a source of pride, but also a grim reminder of the high cost of war. Many men were wounded or exhausted, and the desert heat made the task of tending to the injured even more challenging. For Napoleon, however, the victory represented a crucial achievement. He had not only maintained control of Egypt, but also reinforced his reputation as an unbeatable strategist. News of the victory spread quickly, further elevating his prestige among his officers and troops. For the Ottoman Empire, the defeat at Abukir was a severe blow, both militarily and morally. It signified a failure to halt the French advance in the Middle East, paving the way for Napoleon to solidify his presence in the region. As the dust settled and the last gunshots faded in the distance, the French knew that the Battle of Aboukir would be remembered as one of their most decisive victories in the Egyptian campaign. The battle, however, did not mark the end of Napoleon's challenges in Egypt, but rather the beginning of a new phase in his campaign. With victory at Abukir secured, Napoleon and his army began their triumphant return to Alexandria. Despite visible exhaustion, the French troops marched with a palpable sense of victory. Morale was high, and the men's faith in their general's leadership had never been stronger. Napoleon, always aware of the power of military propaganda, made a point to reinforce his image as an invincible commander. As news of the victory reached Alexandria, a wave of enthusiasm swept through the French forces stationed in the city. Napoleon seized the moment to reorganize his troops and strengthen the city's defenses, knowing that new threats could arise at any moment, whether from the Ottomans or a potential British intervention. Alexandria, serving as the campaign's headquarters, also became the center of celebrations, with both soldiers and civilians rejoicing over the victory. Meanwhile, word of the victory at Abukir quickly spread throughout Egypt and reached European powers as well. For the French, it was a clear demonstration that their presence in Egypt would not be easily removed. For the Ottoman Empire, however, the defeat was a public humiliation, underscoring its struggles against Napoleon's modern and well-organized forces. Despite the euphoria of victory, Napoleon was already contemplating his next moves. The Egyptian campaign was far from over, and he knew that maintaining control of the region would require further battles and a sustained military presence. Yet, the victory at Abukir had solidified his position, not only militarily, but also as a visionary leader capable of reshaping the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. The victory at Abukir was more than just another military triumph. It was a symbol that Napoleon's dream of a new empire in the East was still very much alive. If you were on the battlefield, would you have followed Napoleon to the end? Comment below and share your thoughts on this bold victory. Before we wrap up, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss upcoming episodes about Napoleon's campaigns and other key events in ancient history. Your subscription is essential to keep this project alive and continue exploring the legacy of the great leaders of the past together.